Now for the weekly market update of the 5th of June, can you believe it's winter? So it's the winter update. And joining us in the studio here today, we've got RP Data's Senior Research Analyst Cameron Cusher and Anthony Keane, who's your money editor nationally. We've got the big heavyweights, actually not heavy, but you know what I mean, authorities. So welcome, Cameron.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks for having me.
Now, Cameron, as we do always, I just want to get a global perspective of what's happening. Quick rundown of what's happening in the States, then move to the national, and then drill down to South Australia. So go for it.
Yeah, well, I guess internationally and focusing on the States, as you said, we're starting to see a clear sign of a housing market recovery there. Property prices in the US are up about 12% over the last 12 months. So obviously values there fell significantly greater than they did in Australia, but are now starting to rebound on the back of improving economic conditions. Broadly at a national level, we've seen a bit of the steam come out of the housing market. Of course, we saw home values increase by 2.8% over the first 3 months of the year. Now, over the year to date, the first 5 months of the year, we're now seeing capital gains of just 1.1%. So we're seeing that typical second quarter of the year slowdown at the moment. So broadly speaking, over the last month, we saw values fall in most capital cities. If we look to Adelaide, for example, and keeping in mind Adelaide's a bit of a smaller market and the results can be a little bit more volatile, we've seen values down 2.3 over the last month, but up 0.5% over the quarter.
Is that right? So values have actually... See, that's only because I've been away, mate.
That must be it, yeah. And then over the year, Adelaide's actually the only housing market that's seen values decline on a year-on-year basis, down 1.6%. But the trend is that the market has generally been improving since late last year, albeit that the rate of improvement's fairly sluggish in Adelaide at the moment.
So let's now talk about, well, South Australia, Adelaide, basically Adelaide, South Australia. Actually, let's just look at the regional. Have you got any of the regional stats there at the moment? Is that dragging us down?
Well, if you look at regional South Australia at the moment, it's also underperforming at the moment. It's actually ground out some growth in values over the last 12 months, up 0.2%. But realistically, that's nothing to get too excited about. So across most of South Australia, we're seeing that the market is underperforming some of the larger capital cities like Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane and Perth. Now,
just while we're on it, sorry, I'm going to go left field here, but my mail on the Iron Triangle and some of that regional sale activity, it's coming out of Perth and the guys that sell investment properties unseen.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Obviously, some of the regional Western Australian prices now are pretty unsustainable. You're looking up close to $1 million in some of those mining towns at the moment. So they're probably looking for more viable and cheaper alternatives. And as you said, the Iron Triangle does offer that, although the prices may seem high. When you start comparing it to mining towns in Queensland or mining towns in Western Australia, they're significantly lower.
But do you think that the fact that they've got those sales occurring, which apparently are in reasonable numbers, given the low transaction numbers in the regional areas, is actually keeping the appearance of the regional South Australia inflated compared to the reality?
It's probably pretty hard to disseminate that. I mean, where you're talking about, most people in South Australia live in Adelaide, and the Iron Triangle area is fairly sizable for a regional market, but you've also got places like Mount Gambier, Victor Harbour, these sort of areas, which probably have a fairly strong influence on the overall rest of state results as well. Okay,
well, let's get back to mainstream. So transaction volumes, in other words, the number of people moving, how's that tracking?
Yeah, if we look at sales volumes on an annual basis, and at the moment across Adelaide, sales volumes are slightly down on where they were at the same time last year, but only ever so slightly, half a percent. But we have seen a bit of a pickup in sales activity over the past 6 months compared to the previous 6 months. And that's a general trend we're seeing right across the country. Although value growth has slowed, we've continued to see the number of sales picking up, which is encouraging for any kind of a sustainable recovery in the housing market. We're going to need to see a further pickup in sales volumes, keeping in mind that they are coming off an extremely low base at the moment.
Cameron, as a real estate agent, we're feeling extremely unloved at the moment because there's hardly any properties coming on the market at present, and the sales have been excellent in the last 6 to 8 weeks. So there's a real shortage of supply coming through. Has any of that activity become a statistic? Has hit your figures yet?
Definitely. I mean, with regard to properties entering the market, we're seeing that compared to the same time last year, there's quite, not much new stock coming onto the market at all. Over the last 4 weeks, we've seen just 2,000 odd new homes coming onto the market in Adelaide. And again, that's a trend fairly prevalent right around the country. At the moment, we're seeing about just over 11,000 total properties available for sale. So not a huge amount of stock coming on for sale, particularly when we compare it to the last 3 years or so, where stock levels have been. There's clear evidence that the stock available for sale is falling. And obviously there's not a lot of new listings coming on to replace that stock that's either getting taken off the market or selling.
Now, Cameron, we're about to have a whole marketing exercise about, for goodness sake, sell your home in winter, because there's virtually no competing property, the way it's looking. And that actually ends up with a good outcome because the buyers, our experience is the buyers are still there. What's your official take on it with a non-real estate view on the world? We're just kidding ourselves?
No, I don't think so. I think, you probably may not have as much to choose from if you're buying in winter or likewise in summer. But as you said, there's less people actively looking, and particularly in the southern states like Victoria, like South Australia and like New South Wales, people really do start to get excited about property again, either in the first quarter of the year or the third quarter of the year, so into that spring selling season. So, it's an opportunity for people that want to try something a little bit different and have less competition to get your property out there now and get it noticed. So I've bought previously in winter and I've bought previously in summer, and I've sold in those same seasons, and I've been quite happy with the outcomes each time I've done that.
Okay, Cameron, so just to wrap up, I've been off the air for 6 weeks. Just talk to me, what's the overall picture? How does it look for real estate? The trends over the last 4 to 6 weeks, is it...
Obviously, what we've seen broadly is some weakening market conditions, and that's happened really since the federal budget was announced. Obviously, consumer sentiment has fallen over the past 2 months and fell quite sharply. And I just think that still people are very jumpy with regards to whatever economic news we're getting. I think given that we were promised a federal government surplus and we missed that by quite a sizable distance, I think that does make some consumers out there concerned. But generally speaking, I think economic conditions are still all right in Australia, and I think a lot of other people would love to be in the economic conditions that we are in Australia if you go overseas. So I think that confidence will return, but what we really need is a sustainable recovery in consumer confidence for any sort of housing market recovery to gain any momentum.
And I've got Anthony Keane here. A bit of input from you, Anthony. How do you feel about Cameron? Is he same sort of thoughts?
Good job as always, Cameron. Just one question for me. Why do you think that the South Australian market is underperforming the broader national sort of market at the moment in terms of house prices?
It's a pretty tough one to really pinpoint. I guess the unemployment rate's a little bit higher in South Australia. The employment participation rate's a bit lower. Economic growth's a little bit slower in South Australia. And you're probably just not getting that level of confidence as hitting markets like Sydney and Perth in particular at the moment. So I think it really just comes down to a confidence thing. Obviously, announcements last month like Ford stopping manufacturing in Australia. Maybe some of the Holden workers are now a little bit concerned in South Australia that maybe they'll go down the same path as Ford went. So I think it really just comes down to confidence and people feeling comfortable that they can remain in their jobs and see pay rises into the future. And maybe there is a little bit of concern in South Australia at the moment that may not be the case.
Excellent.
And just to finish up on rental, just a snapshot, how do you see the rental market, particularly in South Australia?
There's a little bit of rental activity happening. If we look over the past 12 months, for example, rental rates in South Australia, or in Adelaide rather, have picked up 1.5% for houses and 0.8% for units, so not particularly strong rental growth. But looking specifically over the last couple of months, we actually have seen a bit of an acceleration in terms of rental growth, and I guess that's reflective of the fairly tight rental market conditions throughout the city at the moment, and what we're seeing in most cities.
And Cameron, just briefly, anecdotal stuff, I got briefed yesterday on the rental movements, and only about 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, the inquiry almost stopped on rentals. So you'll see that come through, presumably, if that continues. And it's like almost with the weather changed in Adelaide, went from sunny winter to wet winter, and it's like everyone just shut the doors on rentals.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. It'll be interesting to see if we do see a bit of a slowdown in the growth in rents over the coming months. And it sounds like everyone's gone into hibernation for the winter.
Cameron, as always, great to catch up. As always, we're way over time. Anthony, thanks, guys. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Anthony.
Now that wraps up this week's Market Report.